No matter who you are, you're born with two minds. And no matter who you are, one of them seems to be rotten. And there is no chance, if you ever have any independence of mind, if you can ever see there is no chance, there is no reality to rehabilitating what you're born with. I am quite aware of the fact that common wisdom says the collective thought of man is that at least some portion of what a person is here is due to their environment. We all have heard that. If you can see, you know it's not true. Once you see that, then all questions of any possible rehabilitation are, to be charitable, irrelevant. What you're dealing with is also, I could give you a subdictum of the fact that that everyone is born with two minds, and that is, it's known, you may not have heard about it, it's known as the 1 foot in a bucket of slop principle. If you're alive mentally, we're not talking now about what people would think of as being their physical genetic background, because even common wisdom says that you can't do much about that this side of plastic surgery. That if your family has ears like elephants, and you can't be all that surprised if you do. But that is not your 1 foot in the bucket of slop principle. We're talking about here. If you ignore, and of course you don't know about it, you've got to ignore it. If you don't know, but if you do know and you ignore the 1 foot in the bucket of slop principle, then you are doomed to always feel as though you should be in the middle of some remedial action, that you should be involved with some form of self-improvement. If you understand that to be alive intellectually, you are subject, you and everyone is subject to having, you were born 1 foot in a bucket of slop. The only thing that a person can do that had any intelligence is to recognize the situation and go on about their business. If you're ordinary, there's a justice involved, if you care to try to follow it right quick. If you were ordinary and we could play with reality, which couldn't be done, but if you were ordinary and recognized it, what I'm just saying, and then the part I said, recognize it and then go on. If you're ordinary and recognized it, you couldn't go on. You would fall down. You would be intellectually depleted. You would have nowhere to go. You'd see no reason to live. Because no matter that people have hobbies, no matter that people believe that they're on some mission perhaps in life, at the intellectual level, you're basically involved with some attempt at self-improvement. That can be called everything from that which would seem to be in the theological, spiritual ballpark, to the educational, to the social. But it's all in this, that if you're going to take the intellectual life of man, the singular life, that which distinguishes you from the animals, to take it seriously, that is, to make you get up and live, then whatever it is you're trying to do is a form of self-improvement, of attempted self-improvement. So if an ordinary person could see, if you remember this was a sidetrack, if an ordinary person could see that they were born with two minds like everyone else, and one of them is rotten, and the sub-dictum being that principle of everyone has 1 foot in a bucket of slop. If they could see that, then of course I wouldn't have to say, just see it and then go on about your business, because if suddenly they saw it, which they couldn't, but if they did, they'd have no further business. Probably their dying words would be trying to grab at my throat and say, what do you mean going about my business? You know, my business just went kaput. I got no business. Now that I see what's going on, I got no business. I know. That's why you can't see it. You're not supposed to. It gets to be a question also of how does somebody stay tied to the rotten mind? How does somebody stay involved with that which has no chance of ultimate success, that is, any form of self-improvement at the ordinary level. That is, in some way trying to rehabilitate, to improve the mind you were born with. We're not talking about education, of course, but to improve the status, what seems to be the natural genetic status of the mind. Again, assuming you're past the point of thinking, well, I picked up these terrible, biased, angry, hostile thoughts I have, I picked it up from my mother or my father. Of course, if you're really good, you did, if you knew what you were saying. Except your parents are not your parents. But that's not what we're talking about, because you cannot use that kind of verbal basis to discuss life with the ordinary mind. So we're not talking about what seems to be the genetic basis, because we're assuming that your brain would pass muster, run through a CAT scan, an X-ray machine. They put you through the conveyor belt at the airport. I assume they'd let you on a plane. That is, that your brain seems to be more or less standard issue. They don't see anything wrong with your brain. So your rotten mind, the part you disapprove of, you're born with, but how do you stay locked into trying to change it if what I'm pointing out is correct, that it cannot be changed, that it can be subject to, we can define self-improvement, if you can hear this with no cynicism involved. Self-improvement is a right foot attempting to reorder the way toes are situated on a left foot. That is the attempt at self-improvement, which you can say was impossible. That means I rest your case. But if you notice the example, you can say it's impossible, but it's not so far-fetched. It's not like saying trying to teach statues how to fly or something like that. If you think, there's the right foot attempting to change the order of the toes on the left one, it almost, and you could almost say, well, that might be done. Because they're two feet. They're in the same species. They're in the same subcategory. They got something in common. In the order of toes, it's not going to change that much. You could still walk if sitting on one of your feet, that the big toe was out here and over here. Of course, a sane person wouldn't go to all this trouble, but what I'm saying is it almost sounds as though, well, there could be some validity there. What if there was? Then you're back to this question. What good would it do you? What if you could? What if you could improve yourself, and that was the basis of it, that I gave you a fair detailing or a fair example. It was for you to decide, I want my left foot, instead of looking like a reverse of my right, I want the big toe over here on this side, and the little toes running this way so that when I look down, I got big toes, and I got... What if through the power of your mind, what if through taking drugs or following some spiritual discipline, what if you could do that and prove me wrong? That would be self-improvement. Then the question is, what have I accomplished? Back to the question I was trying to further present. Is assuming that I'm giving a fair detailing, that the way you stay locked into the apparent seriousness of life, the way that you stay tied to your rotten mind, no matter what you would have called ordinary people, call it their sinful nature, their subconscious mind, their forgotten traumas. They call it all sorts of things, but everyone admits that they're not perfect. Anybody that says they are perfect, of course, we put them away. Or you put them away. Which, don't look for me to object. I don't want them in my house. So, at any rate, all sane people say, well, sure, I'm not perfect. So, they got a rotten mind. They got a part of a rotten mind. But if I'm giving a fair detailing, then why? How? If somebody gets some notion, and they thought, well, you're right. And if it is true that I did not pick it up somewhere, that's just irrelevant. My father could have had a rotten mind. So what? You can turn around to somebody that lives next door and you think, boy, if I'd grown up with a great father like that, I wouldn't have a rotten mind. And you talk to your buddy that you grew up with, and hell, his mind, he thinks, is as rotten as yours. Of course, you're not supposed to go into such as that because you can always explain it. so I'm not going to do it for him. But how, if there is some validity to that, how does a man stay tied to the rottenness, the thinking that he has that is unprofitable to him? By no one else's definition, he says it. We'll just accept it. You say it. There are things about my mind that I disapprove of so heartily that I'm even ashamed to tell you what they are. Either from some moral or religious basis, or just on a basis that they're driving me nuts. It interferes with me living. So if you in some way got up close, just for the sake of us discussing, and that you in some way tried to accept this as a workable theory, all right? What if I did ignore, I'm speaking for an ordinary person, if I did ignore the common wisdom, the common theories that rotten-mindedness is caused by my environment? Somebody caused, I was not born rotten-minded. I was born probably as at least a spiritual heir of John Locke. My little mind was a blank blackboard, or a gray board if you got decent brains, I guess, healthy brains. And it was blank, and thereupon began to inscribe unprofitable, obscene scratches, my parents, my peers, my uncle, society. What if you, in some way, it just struck you in a blinding moment of rationale and lucidity that, well, that's a crop. Or even if it's not a crop, it doesn't prove anything. So what if you tried to take this, that I was presenting sort of as a workable theory? Then your question would be, well, why do people stay, or why have I stayed? What are the dynamics of staying locked in to this kind of rotten-mindedness? That there is a part of my thinking that I find rotten, unprofitable. How does this continue to work on a man? It's quite simple. You have to take something that you normally think in a partisan manner. You have to choose sides. Me saying you have to choose sides is a serious misspeak. Because you do not choose sides, but we'll ease up on it. And you don't have a choice as to whether you'll choose sides, because to start with, if you don't choose sides, your brain would never take off. It would not crank up. Nobody's ever even turned the switch. You have to take sides. You're born with two minds, and you must be partisan. You have got to be, in a sense, a belligerent in a conflict. You have to. You got no choice. Or you couldn't think. The mind would not operate. You would have, let us say, genetically, the potential. You would have the electrical chemical energy to run the mind, but you would have never really turned the switch. You would have never have pulled the chain on a light to take advantage of the polarized energy that is the basis of life here in a three-dimensional reality. So you have got to choose sides. You have got to be partisan. You have got to be aligned. You have got to be a belligerent. You have got to be an active participant in what seems to be, whatever your term was, but in some form of a choosing of this conflict that you got going on with two minds that you were born with. Now, people end up believing that, of course, it's caused, that the two minds, back to that, are caused from all sorts of things, from their family to being pulled back and forth, that my parents were different religions or whatever. All the way from that to people believing on a wider scale that it is the effects, the problematic influences of society itself out there struggling. People can't decide whether they should be of this religion or that religion, or we shouldn't decide whether we should be extremely patriotic or not patriotic. And so then people believe that's just kind of an extended version of believing that your family has bruised you and turned your mind, one of your minds, rotten. It's an expansion of that to say that society has, collections of people have done it. Any partisan attitude you have toward an idea is your bucket of slop. You start off standing there. How long you stand there, if you were attempting to become somewhat independent, let us say, how long you stand there, quote, seems up to you. You're born there. Everyone else never gets past that point. They're not supposed to. You're born there, and after that becomes, let's discuss the possibility of getting my foot out of this bucket of slop. Or if you like it another way, everyone is born in a form of prison. It's an old idea. You're certainly born from here down, genetically, physically, from the line of consciousness, one's cerebral cortex, from here down. If you're sane, you simply got to see you're as much in prison as a dog, a cat, any of the animals. Any idea of freedom is not just silly, it's dangerous. That if you tried to do something, if you tried to exercise some form of freedom, which is very common, especially among the so-called mystics and people attempting to do something extraordinary in life, is they try and screw around with some idea of freedom from here down. Like I'll go out and sit in the snow because I don't want to and it's not natural and they'll prove something. And they'll probably, kill them. From here down, any idea of freedom, from that kind of animal level down, is just, you can call it, in fact, I guess it was me, called it ludicrous. It's dangerous. It's just silly. There is no freedom from here down. From here up, what seems to be freedom? The discussion of it, which is what we're back to, what normally takes place from here up on people, is all forms, no matter what it's called, they're attempting to engage in self-improvement. And the ultimate self-improvement is to get free from this slop, to get free from this slime, to get free from this unworkable, unprofitable way in which I think. Although some people call it feel, I know that they think it's emotional problems, but it's here. You have got to be partisan. That is, if you see this, you have got to continue to be partisan to stand there. Of course, you've got to find some alternative to this because, again, if we could have it both ways, if you could still be ordinary, and the only way you can think is by being partisan, the only way you can think is by believing, and we can include anything you want to, you have got to in some way identify yourself with your culture, your religion, your nationality, your race, your neighborhood, and of course, your family. You have got to do that, but you're being partisan. But if you could have it both ways, and then if you say, right, I get some glimpse of what you're saying, but what do you do after that? There is probably the serious rub. Because a person cannot just stop being partisan. They would just go blank. It would be like a screen, I guess, on a computer, just suddenly going blank. Somebody's wiped out all your memory. By the way, the idea, if you'd like a little small detour, I am aware of how dogmatic it can sound to say that you cannot change yourself. Not at this level, not where you're born. Because you can do the examples. The obvious one being that somebody was a drunk and they quit drinking. They became a professional non-drinker. And I don't mean to keep making it sound too sarcastic, because if that's self-improvement to you, then that is self-improvement. And what I'm saying has no validity whatsoever, and it's certainly not saying that that's not true. If you take that as being self-improvement, it doesn't answer anything. There are a few people who have never been able to find that to be self-improvement. It's not that it has no validity, because if you're going any further, you couldn't be a drunk, for instance. You couldn't be on drugs. Or a man who beats up on women, or a woman who beats up on men, now that we're in the 20th century. Whatever it was you're doing, not from my view and not from anybody's moralistic view, not from any institution's view, but whatever you're doing that you found to be rotten, to be unprofitable to you, whatever you're doing, you would have to stop it to get any further. You'd have to stop the behavior. So I'm not poo-pooing a drunk, because if somebody was trying to be more independent of mind, if you're trying to do it while simultaneously downing 2 or 3 drinks every day, you got a nice hobby. But whatever you're doing that you found unprofitable, you got to stop that, but it's not worth discussing. It's back to, it hurts when I do that. Well, I have a serious extremely workable, guaranteed, diagnosis, nay, prescription. Don't do it. I know that almost everyone chuckles when you hear it, but when do you chuckle? So, most of you know why you chuckle, because it ain't funny. It's just the point blank shot between the eyes that, there's nothing else to say. But the little side excursion I was going to point out, see, everything about life tells you, it's arranged in such a way to tell you that you can change in a profitable way at the ordinary level, and it's supposed to, that you can improve yourself. Again, if ordinary mind did not believe that, you would not get up. You would get up every morning and you would do that which would fulfill from here down all the animal needs. Which, I don't know what would it take you nowadays living in society? 15 or 20 minutes? How long does it take to get to a soup kitchen or a homeless shelter? So after that, what would you do? Would you dress up and go to work, and etc.? No. You would not. So you have to believe that you can improve yourself in some profitable way. And it just becomes a hobby, and it is so collective that no one ever questions it. And we're not here to question on the basis that they're wrong. It holds the rest of it together. It keeps this ship together so that some people can get around and be silly and go upstairs and down the stairs and go to the bars where they don't really belong. They end up almost being stowaways, but the rest of them got to take the cruise seriously. They're going to look out for icebergs, and while you're in there having fun doing whatever it is you do, then they're down in the gym working out, and then after that they go to an AA meeting, or they go to hear a real estate seminar, how to improve yourself. But if it wasn't for that, the ship would fall apart. I was going to say, even though everything in life tells people, and they have to accept it, that change is possible, and that you can rehabilitate, you can improve your mind, not just improve your muscles and improve your social status or improve your bank account, but that you in some meaningful way, either in a religious context or otherwise, can improve yourself. Even though everybody would say that, all sane people would go yes. I also wanted to point out that on the other hand, they also know it's not true. The proof of it being all ideas of life after death, and even better than that, it's the basis of the notion of reincarnation. Think about it. Now, I know that in the Western world, Judaism and Christianity, and reincarnation is not used as a nameable tenet, but that's what life after death is. It's just a different hobby for Baptists and Buddhists to argue over the fact of reincarnation. But going to heaven, going to paradise, going to anywhere, it's still reincarnation. But anyway, what you know is the Reader's Digest version of reincarnation, that you keep trying to, or that you do come back and you're supposed to keep trying to do better. And if you don't do better, next time you come back in a worse position. You come back, and instead of a roofer, you come back as a septic tank man. And then you got to work yourself back up. But do grasp the idea of reincarnation. The basis of it is the awareness that you can't really improve yourself. Not in any meaningful way. And so that's the idea of reincarnation. It almost flies the other way to ordinary minds, but I assume that some of you can hear that that's exactly the basis of it. But I could take the ordinary position and say, oh, no, that's wrong, because this is almost going in the other direction, showing that men do continue to improve themselves. And they miss the point of, yeah, except they realize you can't do it in this lifetime. Yeah, and they'd say, yeah, but you missed the point. That's why we get to come back and keep working on it. And then I'd say, yeah, but you missed the point. Each time that you're there in one lifetime, you can't do anything. No, yeah, but you missed the point. We get another chance. Yeah, and that's why we get another chance, because you can't do anything. I thought some of you might get something out of that. To say that you need to be nonpartisan, if for some reason that somebody heard some of this and thought, I would like to not be tied to whatever it is I think now. Even if you say, I don't know what I want to do, but it's obvious I'm not trying to be a philosopher. I don't want to be a better Catholic or a better Jew, or I don't want to be anything I know about. Nothing against them. It might still be a parallel hobby, but you thought, the form of self-improvement is something I'm not sure what it is. It's something I want to know. It's I wish my mind would go somewhere. I wish there was something I knew. You might have phrased it as I wish I knew some kind of great secret if there is one. Then you've got to understand that what you know now, that is the way your mind works. Let's put it that way rather than what you know. But the way your mind works, you've had, let's say, several or more decades to come to the realization that I am not getting anywhere. I know more facts, I have read more books, but I don't know anymore. If you don't know that, you don't really know anything. I don't mean theoretically of playing some pseudo-magnanimous, well, we're all sort of dumb and stupid. Now, you got to know yourself that I simply don't know anymore. I am no more satisfied than I was 20 years ago here. To say that if you're going to go further, that you've got to be nonpartisan, again, if we play having it the best or the worst of all possible intellectual worlds, if you're an ordinary person, you could hear that, and at the same time you're still ordinary. That some way you suddenly got two extraordinary minds, not the same two old ones, but that you could hear, and yet you're still you. That you still got one foot in a bucket of slop, and let's just say for a few minutes that we're talking, and you do try to sort of move away, and you can almost pull your foot. Then if I said, or if you heard, that the way to do it was you've got to quit choosing sides. You have to intellectually be nonpartisan. The best you could make of that, the best you could make, if you're back more or less at just the ordinary level, is you'd be saying, well, you're just talking about being broad-minded. But people have been saying it for years. You would have to know. Again, assuming that you're a little above ordinary in your workings. You would have to know, wait, everybody's been saying be broad-minded, but they say be broad-minded on the basis that they still believe, since all ideas have two purposes, and they've got two minds. It would be, here's what it amounts to. Let us say it would be a Lebanese Christian that suddenly has tried to be broad-minded and thinks, you know what, I mean, it's obvious that our fellow Lebanese Muslim brothers are misled, but Jesus, I can't run everybody's life. That doesn't mean they're less of a human. I should be charitable. I should help them. That's what they call being broad-minded, you understand. That they're still limping, though. And they could be the most charitable people in the world intellectually. But to be charitable to somebody already indicates, it's just not analyzing this way, it indicates that you are trying to be forgiving to someone who is less enlightened. We're not talking about the charity of feeding the hungry. We're talking about from here up. To try and be broad-minded is what? To be tolerant of people who are misled. Now, all right. So you do see that there is a certain kind of flaw in taking that as being nonpartisan. It's not nonpartisan. You are still choosing sides. If you went a little past that, still playing the guy who is really still of ordinary intelligence, but just momentarily a little bit straining, even if he went as far as you did and went, you're right, that is not being nonpartisan. You're right, I'm still biased. I'm just trying to be more charitable to those, maybe make them see the light. You're right. So if that same person tried to go a little bit further, what would they get to? About the best they would get to, and this would almost shut them down. They almost couldn't say it, but I'll go ahead and do it. If they tried to push it any further, if I said, well, think about that, and they thought about what we just talked about, and they went, you're right, that is still not being actually non-aligned. That's still not being freed from any kind of bias toward one of the thoughts or the other. No matter what the example, it was religious, economic, whatever. If they got any further past that, about the best they'd come up with was, they're saying, well, you're just saying to come out and be a person of, just no opinion. Which is almost the antithesis of a cultured person, a civilized person. I mean, it almost makes no sense, but that's about the most they could, as far as they could go in that kind of sequential direction. It was, all right, you're right, just being broad-minded in the ordinary sense is not really freedom from being intellectually biased. So what would it be past that? And I would suggest that they're most common, at least in the Western world, those who speak English, the closest they'd come would probably be the words that say, well, all you're saying is to get to the point of being a man with no opinion. That's no kind of life. Plus, I don't see how to accomplish anything. Of course, they're already expressing an opinion because all you can do is go so far with that and it eats itself up. But the point they would be expressing is, whether they understood or not, they're saying, I don't see where it goes, and they're correct. They'd say, well, it's like I've walked up to the edge of the earth. It's like I have retraced Columbus, but in my case, he was right. You know, it's the edge of the earth. There's nowhere to go with this. It makes the idea, again, above the animal level of freedom, is ridiculous. From here down, there is no freedom. From here up, the idea of freedom becomes self-consuming, because it gets to the point that people say, well, the only kind of freedom would be to try and shut this thing down. May I refer you to all of the various forms of attempted meditation, the use of certain drugs, even alcohol. You cannot, if you're taking sides, you cannot shut down the mind. People try. That seems to be one of the other ways that men have tried historically, whether they do it in the religious context of meditation or whatever, of trying, well, I'll just shut this son of a bitch down. I can't seem to do anything else with it. If I could just shut it down. Let's assume that you could do that. Let's assume that you can go through great, years, by all reasonable conservative estimations, that you can go through years sitting out in the cold, cross-legged, doing something. And let's assume that you get to the point that this rottenness that you smell in your mind, this biased, partisan thought that you find uncomfortable and unprofitable, let's assume that after X amount of decades that you can shut it down, that you can sit there and one day, Satori, it stopped. May I ask you, what have you accomplished? Now, it's a hobby for some people, but what if it was you and you were trying to get away from one foot in a bucket of slop, and if you could turn off the mind, the rottenness stops. And there you sit. Let's assume you can do it. The mind is shut down, and there you sit. And in some way, we'd already made arrangements so that you said, if it ever happens to me, I'm going to wiggle my little toe so that you know my mind shut down. So there you sit, and we keep coming back checking after 30 years. One day we're there, and you're sitting there, and suddenly you got your eyes closed, and you're in whatever position, but suddenly your little toe wiggles. And let's assume that we accept, he or she finally shut their mind down. Take out the hostility and the sarcasm. What has been accomplished? What if they sit there, and what if it is true? My mind no longer has that odious aroma to me. And there they sit. What are we going to do? Take them home, use them as a doorstop? You see the point. Not the point of us laughing at them, but you see the point that if you did that, if you're still going to intellectually be alive, what have you done? You might as well, if you're trying to be intellectually alive, and you think, well, the way to do that is to kill my mind. Let's say that there's some room to question your absolute intellectual wherewithal. That if you get there, let's assume that you're still kind of intelligent, and suddenly you were able to shut down your mind, and just before you did, it suddenly struck you, whoa! It's somewhat like trying to be drunk to regain your composure. There is a certain flaw, that is, the attempt to rehabilitate one of one's own minds is destined, it's not a success though in life because it keeps you alive, is destined to be incomplete rather than call it failure. It is destined to never succeed. It is destined to never reach the end of the sentence. Which is one reason, again, may I suggest, that death seems to be so, to human imagination, so complex, so pregnant with possibilities. Especially that, well, next time maybe I'll do better. We are coming back, aren't we? Aren't we, Mother? You said we're, yes. Father, yes. That death seems to be perhaps a great door that will open to us that for some reason is not open to us now. And for some reason, death is going to be the big time payoff. If you'd forget freedom and think more on the basis of being non-aligned, rather than just forget freedom, because it's ridiculous at the physical level, and it's irrelevant because it's improbable here. You're going to be favoring one foot, you're going to be partisan toward what you think at that level, and there is no changing it. The closest to change is death. The closest to change would be if you could kill yourself mentally. I've been able to shut this thing down. Which I just brought up because I assume enough of you have read that people claim they've done it. Don't bet the farm on it, by the way. Because how'd they get back around to writing a book or telling somebody? But I know the basis of it. And I'm sure some of you have tried it, and there are even drugs that give that impression to people. That, oh, it is almost as though my mind's not. You know, almost counts with children and in marbles and horseshoes and religion and life. But that is not independent thinking. Keep your foot out of the slop.